Today is August 26th, 2009. I'm Carol Hornbuckle, and I'm interviewing Dorothy Allen for the 30's project. All right, Dorothy, you grew up in the Riverton area?
Yes, 2 miles south, 2 miles east and 1 mile south of Riverton.
Okay, and you were born at home.
Yes.
Your parents were farmers?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about life on the farm?
Well, it was great. It was all I knew.
Mm-hmm.
We did everything together. My mother liked to work with my dad, and my dad helped my mother. And so my brother and I worked with them. And we would go to the field, and when they combined, or they bound wheat and oats and made bundles,
Mm-hmm.
we would help stack the bundles. And I didn't do much stacking because I was but I did a lot of carrying bundles.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother could stack them like my dad wanted them. He had to fix them so the rain wouldn't come in and rot them. They had to be stacked just so and covered so the rain didn't bother them, because they would sit there for a long time till the threshing machine came.
Mm-hmm.
And we had very nice neighbors. Everyone from our place 2 miles west was in our hay crew, we called it, and we did our wheat, our thrashing together. The men came, and at first they stayed for supper. They always ate lunch at our house, and then that was a big time. And then we would get around and fix supper before they would leave, and then they would chore after they got home. And
Wow. So that was a lot of work for the women folk, wasn't it?
yes,
Feeding
it
all
was.
those people.
It was, and usually neighbor ladies came and helped,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother would go to their place and help.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother was real handy at working. That I just was more like the water girl or something.
When you provided supper too, was that more like cold leftovers from
No, she
lunch,
pretty
or it
well
was another
cooked
hot meal?
She pretty well cooked another meal.
Wow.
Because that was a long time since noon.
Right.
Because it would be dark before they'd give up and quit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they had chores to do when they got home, so then she had them fed. She felt better. But she didn't like it when they quit staying for supper, because she enjoyed that.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
So she must have had a very good reputation about her meals, too.
She liked to see the men enjoy her food.
Mm-hmm. What would be some of the things that she would have fixed?
Well, always mashed potatoes and gravy and vegetables and salads. And we always had fried chicken and good meat, because we had our own meat. We used a locker in Riverton until we got our deep freeze. We got our first refrigerator when I was in the 8th grade, and that was a big help. My dad would fix the ice box so it would drain out, and we didn't really have, we had a bathroom, but we didn't have water, running water. So we carried the water from the kitchen stove and the tea kettle. And everybody, they usually started with me, and everybody washed down and kept the same water. So it got hot deeper as Mom would add more water.
Right, right. What kind of cook stove did you have?
Well, we had a big wood stove that and it had a reservoir on the back and a big oven, and when she'd bake her bread, she gauged how much to fill it by keeping the cobs or wood to the fire. And
Quite an art, wasn't it?
yeah, she baked bread, I think, twice a week, because we had hired help or lots of company. She loved company. So
Wow.
Lots of company.
And probably always wore a dress with an apron?
Oh, yes, yeah. Very seldom did she put on Dad's pants.
When she helped out in the field, did she?
She just had her apron and her dress on. And I didn't have slacks too much either. I usually had a dress. It's just what the girls wore then, didn't we?
That's right.
But later, in the later 30s, then we girls had slacks. But a lot of times they were just our brother's old worn-out overalls or something. that was mended, and we had clothes for school, and we had clothes we did the chores in, and we had Sunday school clothes, we had dress clothes. So you had a lot more. We didn't wear our good things
Right.
up for every day.
What did you wear to school? Did you wear dresses to school too?
Yes, all the time.
Mm-hmm. What kind of shoes?
Well, just normal shoes, tied shoes, and low heels. But we didn't have so many kids and things like that then.
Right, right.
Maybe in the later 30s we did.
How many, what was the name of your school?
Riverton Consolidated. And it was consolidated from the time we started, when my brother, and the school bus was a long black bus, and you rode sideways on seats that went from the driver's seat back to the back door. And our front sidewalk was up above the road. You know, the roads were cut down so deep then, and our front sidewalk was high, and I would have to put my knee up on that first step to get in. So there was two boys, high school boys, that would step out and help my brother and I into the school bus so we didn't have to get in the mud. And always the wheels spun the mud up onto the flat boards, you know.
Right.
And we had that black one, I think, 2 or 3 years, bus, and then we got a green one, because in those roads, we'd had all mud roads, and in those roads, the school bus didn't last long. So the next one was a green one. I think we had 2 green ones, but they were still along the benches along the side that we sat on. And everybody looked after everybody and enjoyed everybody. Real nice. They were kids. We were just like family. And then we got the yellow buses about the time I got in junior high. And then we always had yellow buses after that. And sat in seats like you do now.
Right, right. About how many students would be in your class?
Well, about 13 to 15, maybe. Sometimes it would get down lower than that. When the boys were in the CC camp, it took, I think there were 5 of them at our high school that went to the CC camp. And they quit that because of the war when we were seniors. So those 5 come back and graduated with us. And that still only made us 13 in the class, even adding the 5.
So they didn't go to school while they were at the CCC camp?
Well, I imagine they had schooling of some kind.
Okay, there.
They went out and planted trees.
Right.
Did a lot of work in the community. And their checks come home, I think, a lot to their parents.
So they probably did that to help make ends meet.
And then it was the thing to do for those boys.
Yes, okay. So they would have been about how old when they did that?
Well, I don't remember what the age was.
Over 16? Would they have had to have been?
I would think 15? They would have had to have been over 16. I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
They were older when they came back than we were in school.
But they did let them graduate with you, and great. I didn't realize there were local people in that group. I thought they were all from other places. But
no, there were 5 that came back to our school, but I don't know about the rest of town. But I think there were older boys that didn't come back to school that already had their education.
Okay, okay. What do you remember about games and social things at school?
Oh, at school? Well, at home, my mother always had lots of parties. We had neighborhood parties, and we met every other Saturday night, and we'd go to somebody else's house, and we played party games, and the mothers and dads my folks would go to several with us, and help in the kitchen, and we had lots of fun. There were some very good kids, and 1 or 2 from Hamburg, and mostly very Riverton kids. And
what sort of party games?
Oh, we spun the bottle, and oh gosh, we had lots of games. I don't know why I can't think, but we had lots of fun. we had a new girl came one night, and one of the boys spun the bottle, and he said, "Who is she?" He wanted to know who the new girl was. But we really had a good time. One thing in the neighborhood, we had a neighbor that had two boys, and he was a veteran from World War II, and he belonged to the Sydney rodeo.
World War One. World War One.
Yeah, World One. Yes, excuse me. And he didn't, and he was in the road. He was a member of the rodeo
Legion.
and he didn't have any girls to usher, so he put my name down, and I ushered with, and he took me back and forth with his family so I could usher. So I got to usher my 2 years of 7th and 8th grade, and then the 4 years of high school, and then the year after high school.
Wow.
And it was in the best section at that time, and really, because I loved horses.
Oh, what a coup!
Yes, it was wonderful.
So this was in the early days, probably, of the rodeo then. Well, the rodeo had been going.
The first rodeo they had was in 23, and I went in the baby buggy, my mom and dad, and they had this is what they told me because I never been, but my mother said they put parked cars, made a big circle, then they would bring the horses in, and it would take about 5 or 6 men to hold a horse till somebody else got on, and then they would turn them loose and they'd buck inside that circle.
Wow, wow.
And I don't know how many years that went on, but
But when you were ushering, there was the grandstand.
yes, and while I was ushering, I think they put the north grandstand up. I think at first they always had bleachers on the east end, and the chutes always were on the west. And one lady, I didn't know anything about smoking. My dad didn't smoke, and nobody in our family. And I ushered one lady up, and she was dressed real fancy, and she said, "May I smoke?" And I didn't know. So I went down and checked, and they said, "Yes, she can smoke all she wants to."
Do you remember, did they have famous acts come then? Do you remember any of the big stars that would come while you were there?
Oh, yeah. I'm not very good at that anymore, thinking. But right now I can't think of any, but they had, between like bucking and
bull riding
and that sort of thing, they would have people who rode horse, did tricks around the arena. See, there used to be a fence to fence in the arena, and then there was a big driveway between the grandstands and the arena, and lots of activities. The clowns and everything were out there where it was safer. And they kept something going all the time. And they did trick riding, and lots of interesting things. And
did they have a midway then?
yeah, a big midway. Yes, big midway. Down, to me it would be west of the buildings that they have now. And, it was a big midway.
Did you have time to go there?
I didn't go when I was ushering, but when my folks would take me back over in the evenings, we would go. They had a Lupa plane, and when I was a senior, and one of the girls didn't scream like the rest of us girls. And I said, "Arlene, what were you doing?" She said, "I had my necklace in my mouth."
Oh, dear. Well, your mother was quite the social director, wasn't she?
She loved company. We had some cousins that only got to go to 8th grade, and they would come and stay in the wintertime, and they would help in my place at the milking and help my dad. And we had 2 extra bedrooms and they knew it. Everybody hitchhiked back then, and the boys didn't come together, but sometimes they were there at the same time. And these 2 cousins that came, and they did a lot of work for my dad. We always cut all of our own wood out of the timber, and we didn't ever use coal. And so it took Mom and Dad a lot of hard work.
Right.
So these boys, when they came, they didn't come just
They earned
lazy
their
around.
keep.
They
Yeah.
learned their keep, and they were very pleasant, very good.
So what did your father raise on the farm?
Well, he rotated his crops. He had big herd of stock cattle, and then where the oats and wheat and the hay were, then he would put corn, and he would rotate the three year by year. And I think it seems to me like maybe he lived things 3 years, and then he would move, change everything. And my mother would ride in the back in a wagon that threw the seed out. I can't remember what they called that, but my dad drove the tractor.
Did your, oh, go ahead.
No, I don't.
Did your father ever farm with horses or?
Yes, at first. He would have 4 head of horses to plow the corn. And when my brother got to be 9, he had a little 2-row, and he drove a team. And there was a lever that came back, and he guided it with that lever, he guided the plows down below to the right place, and he'd get the horses going again. And he went every road that my dad did, and it was company for my dad. And,
Oh, yeah.
and he thought he was really working.
Yes, yes.
And I always went with the horses down to the tank to water them, and that was my job. We had electricity, but we didn't have an electric pump, and I pumped water.
Do you remember the names of your horses?
Oh, yeah. There was Rex, and there was Kike, and there was, my horse was named Pinto, and we had a pony named Betty, and we had the bay team was Shorty, my dad's school horse that he rode to school, and we bought another horse that was the same color, and they thought the man's name that owned it was Maud, so they named her Maud, and come find out it was the same name as my mother.
Didn't go over too well.
No, she didn't care. She told it. And then there was Rex, and I can't think of one horse was named Rex, and I named one of my boys Rex because my husband and my oldest boy lay down on the floor and I was going to name him kind of a girl's name so I could slip and get a girl. And I was 3 days in the hospital before I named him because I couldn't believe they would want. And Jim was very cowboy. The oldest boy was a cowboy, and he didn't, after he would graduate out of high school, he just forgot all that. But he would get on stairs in the lot and right if he could get him close to the gate where he could get on, and he loved anything to do with rodeo.
Now, you must have you rode horses then. You had riding horses when you grew up.
That's what I did on Sundays, was afternoons we rode. And sometimes I'd take a bucket and put my mom a bucket full of plums, wild plums, and then we didn't have so many throwbacks on the plums. We didn't have as many bugs that ate, and worms and things in the fruit.
And what would she do with those plums?
Oh, she made plum butter. And she acted like I brought home something really special.
Oh, yes, wow. A lot of the work is the gathering sometimes.
Oh, it was fun.
What do you remember about the weather in the 30s?
Well, it was pretty risky sometimes. The roads were built down in, and the banks were high, and the east and west roads drifted from the north really bad. And there was such a thing as a poll tax that men had to pay, and my dad would work out his poll tax, but he scooped a lot more but he would spend his days scooping for the school bus to get through. And it was really, really something. We had drifts high enough that you could drive over the neighbors' fences to get to town. It would blow so hard that the snow would be so hard that you could just drive on it. And we would go over as far as the neighbors, and then everybody did, and then we took off diagonal towards town, and
Did you miss school a lot because of storms?
well, no, not so much. We had a man at the end of our line, and I suppose the school had engaged him, I don't know, but he had a team of mules and an old wagon, and he would put loose hay. There wasn't bales that long ago, and he would put loose hay in, and we would ride, and we'd get to school about 2:30, and the other kids would just moan and groan because we just got there. And then we'd have lunch and go to school, and then he would be back to take us back home, and it'd be dark when we'd get home. Of course, we only lived 3 miles, so that wasn't so bad, but there were kids that lived as far, went on around till they lived as far as 6 miles. So
Wow.
But,
Made a long day, didn't it, and the cold. How did you keep warm in the wagon?
oh, we were dressed warm, I guess, so that we were, he probably had blankets for us, because he didn't have any children of his own, and he loved children. His name was Oscar Schaefer, and he was just a very kind man. And he had more fun driving those mules than us.
You gave him something to do and something that he liked to do. What about activities at school or social life at school?
They built a new gymnasium at Riverton, and we didn't get to really enjoy it much. You were supposed to be in sock feet or with tennis shoes on to walk on it. And we did have lots of plays, lots of operettas and lots of plays. And to put the chairs down, they would put tarp down underneath the chairs to keep from scratching that floor. And it was more important than us girls getting to play basketball. And they cut all the girls' basketball. If we played anybody for basketball, we had to play at 4 o'clock. We had to go someplace at 4 o'clock, like Bartlett or Percival, or them come to us. We didn't get to be like, I tried to get my dad to let me take the horse over 2 miles to the Farragut route and play, so I could play basketball, because he would always go home. I could ride him into Riverton and then turn him loose. He might be a couple of hours getting there, but he'd get home.
But your dad didn't go for that?
Well, it was $400,
Oh.
and it was just,
You couldn't.
yeah, you just couldn't. I didn't realize that till I had my own kids, but I really wanted to go to Farragut to school because of basketball.
Did most girls get to play basketball? I think you're the first one we've interviewed that got to play basketball.
Well, they didn't have enough girls in high school interested in it, so they asked one of the other girls and I to join. We were in 8th grade, 7th grade and 8th grade, and both those years we got to play with the high school girls. And I wanted to play, and they did substitute sometimes in the game when we played it. And they had, before we got into high school, it was after we got that new gymnasium that they stopped us, and I think it was my freshman year. It was the first year we used the new gym. It might have been before, and I just didn't realize. I didn't think about it. But that new gym.
It did them a lot of good to build that new gym if they didn't
Well,
let people play on it.
Yes, and now they have all kinds of suppers and everything on it. And
It doesn't seem
You
fair.
saved time.
I do. I wanted to play basketball.
So what kind of uniforms did you?
What?
What kind of uniforms did you have to play in?
Oh, very similar to now.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Very similar. And we would stay after school. We always had basketball practice after school in any town, I think. And my brother would, I don't know how he got home, but we girls walked home, and it would be 6 o'clock before we'd ever get home. But I had the girl I walked with had another mile to go after I drove.
Oh.
And so you actually got to wear shorts and sleeveless tops
Yeah.
to play in?
Well, maybe they weren't quite as skimpy as now, but they were a lot like it.
Okay, well, I mean,
They
you
may
know,
have had sleeves.
yeah, but
Yeah.
they did have sleeves.
Yeah.
But,
No, I think we had we had just to the shoulder. I think.
oh, right.
Oh, I think so. I don't remember. Maybe we had sleeves. I can't remember.
Well, I'm just thinking that this is where girls didn't wear pants too often.
No, we
and then
didn't
to
wear-
wear shorts. That was pretty.
Yeah.
That was pretty daring, Dorothy.
But they all did.
Okay. And I can't imagine how you played basketball with dresses on either. But
But we had Glee Club, and we had sextet and trio, and we would go to show to other school or contests. And we went to Bedford, I remember, and a girlfriend came up. Her dad brought her up on a wagon so far as our place, so why he didn't take us on in. But we both got on my horse with our suitcases and rode him into the edge of town, and then we had to walk from there. Oh, it was deep mud, and he went into someone's garden. So I went back and patiently, and he wouldn't come out. And my dad said it was 10 o'clock before he ever got home. But my brother and I rode horses. I rode my dad's school horse when my brother took the better riding horse. And we had an old barn out at the edge of town, and it didn't have any electricity in it. And so we would go in wasn't really dark. Well, we didn't go together either. And I'd tie that horse in there and wouldn't do that today. I go back 10 o'clock after the ball games and walk 6 blocks back to that barn and got that horse and rode him home. But he would go to sleep. He just walked so far in the mud and he'd bob along. And one night we came to a car that had got stuck in the mud going uphill, and he just definitely went sideways, and I almost was unseated. And it's kind of scared both of us. We weren't sure there wasn't anybody in there, but we made it fine. There wasn't anybody in it, and we just went on. My dad would stay up and take that horse down and take him to get water, and my dad was awful good to us.
yeah.
Christmases, birthdays, what kinds of
Oh,
celebrations?
my
did
mother
you have?
always had a birthday party. We were just a week apart in birthdays. This was 26th of April and mine the 3rd of May. And she had just as much party on my birthday as his. And she baked a lot of angel food cakes because we had lots of eggs. And she would use the yolks to make, what did they call those? A yellow cake. Anyway, it was the same shape as sponge cake. It was same size and everything as angel food, but I preferred the angel food. So I came home when I was 16 from school, and I had a boyfriend in Hamburg, and he hadn't called or made arrangements for anything about my birthday. And my mom took me over to the timber, and we picked wildflowers, which we always did, and come home, and I made those, and I dropped a little bit of water on the floor, and I slipped, and I said, well, you've waxed the floor. I just thought, well, it's just a slick, you know. And she left this sponge cake in the china closet where I could see it, and I said, oh, you made a sponge cake for my birthday. I thought she had made it from the eggs she had left from my brother's. And things just didn't go well, and finally, we had supper, and my brother took the car and left. And it was just understood that he was allowed to do that. And then the neighbors came, and they were my very favorite people, the ones we always, Elvis and Dorothy Spetz. And I said, oh, and their boy was the same age as me. He was born in March, and I was born in May, and we just grew up as brothers and sisters. And he got his license, and he took off. He left his folks off, and he went to town. And they didn't even ask me to go. It was just terrible. So we got in on the Davenport, and I said to Vernice, well, you came to celebrate my birthday, didn't you? And she said, oh, is today your birthday? I always forget.
Oh, no.
And that was really the bottom, because if I needed anybody, I would have gone to Vernice. And so pretty soon my brother came to a door we didn't use very often on the east side of the living room and opened it. And he said, Dorothy, come here. And I thought, oh, he's had a wreck. And I went, and there was just a yard full of kids. I'm nervous from it now. I walked backwards, and my mom caught me. And I really thought I was going to faint. I never fainted in my life. but I fell into her arms because I didn't have any strength to hold myself up. And then we came in, and then we had a wild party. Mom and Dad had everything ready.
You were getting worried, weren't you? Very, very worried. What about Christmases?
Yes, we always had a big Christmas. My mother's people was where we, usually it is. We just go to the mother's people more. And they would come for Christmas. And one day, the four of us were sliding down the hill on my brother's and my sled. We had 3 or 4 sleds because there was always so many kids. But Mom and I were on, and she had her legs around me, and we were going down, and her folks drove up. She was embarrassed. But she was having a good time till they came. And we took my dad. We went over on the hill in the pasture. The snow was so packed that you could just sleigh ride any place. So we went over there before we chored, my brother and I, and we came down, and there's daylight, so we could see the cow path. The cow paths were deep, when they were going. And so we took my dad after we got the chores done and went over, and I pushed him off and then jumped on his back. And we went down, and he didn't think about the cow path. And the sled went right down in there, and we just scooped along on the snow, and he had something terrible through his nose. And I had hit the top of his head and bit my lip. We got our sleds, and all of us went back up home, and Mom said she thought we were going to go back. We were really bleeding. But we did have fun.
What about special food or gifts or things at Christmas? Do you remember any particular things that you would?
Mom would fix lots and lots of candy, and I helped. And she baked a lot of cookies and things and iced them and made special things. And she really enjoyed making the candy. I think she did that all through December because she enjoyed that.
Did the hard times of the 30s make any dent in that?
It really didn't with farmers because we had always had lots of chickens. She would come up to Shenandoah and buy boxes of chickens, and we knew that she was going to be gone for a long time because she'd sat out in that brooder house with the chickens and watched them. She just was fascinated with the baby chickens. And when we'd come home from school, we just knew he would find Mom in the brooder house. But, yeah, she had a stove, and we raised lots of, I expect I got off the subject. And then we had hogs. And so Dad and the neighbors would butcher hogs together with each other. And we had beef. And we used the locker in Riverton for a long time. And then they got their deep freeze. It was a chest type. When I bought mine, I bought uprights. But I know they got their first refrigerator when I was 8th grade.
Wow. Did your mother ever can meat?
Oh yeah. Well, not so much because.
They had the locker.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Any hobos or gypsies or?
Yes, we did have gypsies come, and they were 2 miles west of us. It was Lover's Lane. It was an old lane that nobody could, and we called it Lover's Lane. And they would pull in just inside where the bus would turn and go. And sometimes there would be as many as 6 wagons, and they would have horses to pull those wagons. And they'd have them tied on the side where they fed them. And the neighbors didn't seem to think too much about it. We were 2 miles from there. But we did have somebody stop in the timber regularly while we were at the show in Farragut. It had outdoor movies, and we would come home, and we could tell they had been there because we went to the timber a lot, and they kept watch on us kids that we didn't go. they didn't want to scare us, so.
Mhm.
But there would be chickens left. We had some chickens that grew up over, that hatched over there, and they had left some chickens. Evidently, they had been stealing people's chickens. Is what that was a thing that happened in those days. That they were in our timber. And
Did they ever come to your house to ask for food or anything?
No, and the gypsies didn't come 2 miles over it. We didn't have anything to do, just see them to go. They would have been a mile south of Riverton, and it was and they were there every year for maybe twice a year.
So they had a route that that they
apparently.
just followed.
But we didn't see them.
Do you remember, you talked about some movies. What else did you do for entertainment?
Well, Riverton had a movie, and they had it across Main Street, and you'd sit on the bank on one side, and they'd have the movie on between the stores on the other side. And Farragut had a regular park by the post office, and there was a family that always had popcorn stand, and some of the mothers or older sisters maybe would read the movies if they were silent movies, but then they ran them long enough that they had talkies. And one night they had a ape, and it came down on an open Model T, and I just was at the age where it just scared me. I was just solid, and my uncle picked up his little boy and started home, and he said, "Wasn't that a prettily monkey?" I thought, pretty my eye.
What businesses do you remember in Riverton and Farragut?
Oh gosh, there was Kids Mercantile, and they had shoes, and at one time they sold the tall old shoes, but they held them back. So when I was about 12 years old, they sold them for 10 cents a pair, and we girls all bought that, and they had that little heel that went in and out, back out again, you know. And we had those shoes we wore for different things, and they laced way up to your knee, and we all enjoyed those. And they had a bench in there for women to sit on, 2 benches. They were like, they were high in the back. They were very comfortable. And my mom would go in town at night, and then the men sat with their backs to the window along in the grocery store part. And we kids would run on the streets and see our friends. Some of my very special friend was a girl whose dad ran the other grocery store, and she lived in the back, and so it wasn't hard to find her. And then one of the boys in our class, his dad ran the restaurant, and they had a room in the back of the restaurant that he made into a dance floor, and his dad let him have the Nickelodeon, and then the man that put the Nickelodeon in gave him a bunch of slugs. So I don't think we did have fun dancing there. And the filming station had its back to that restaurant and faced the north, where we faced this restaurant faced the west. And he worked till 10 o'clock, and he was a friend of our family. Of course, everybody knew everybody. And he said when he would go home and get in bed, the dipsy doodle would just still be running through his head. But what did you ask me about the stores? And then Farragut, we shopped at Robert's Grocery and what is the name of the other one? Kimsey was a barber. Well, for heaven's sakes, I even worked for him and can't think of his name. But Delbert Roberts and the one, and Charlie Harriman store. We shopped at both stores. And Harriman's had dry goods, and this Kids Mercantile in Riverton had dry goods. And then they had a beauty shop in the back, and a young lady ran that and gave me permanents, and then tie your hair up on these things, and they were so heavy you didn't dare lean one way or the other, or you'd
Did your mother do any sewing? Did
Yes.
she make clothes for you?
Yes, but she didn't let me mess with the sewing machine because I'd get out of whack. It was a Singer, and she knew how to run it if I left it alone.
Go ride your horse.
And she made all my clothes, and she made some shirts for my dad and my brother.
Wow. Busy lady, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was busy all the time, but she enjoyed it.
Did you ever get to Shenandoah?
Yeah, we went every Saturday. We'd get up and chore, and Dad would do the things we had to do, and then Mom would go to the granary and the horse barn and get get wheat, and she'd take it up to home, up to the stove, and wash it and put it on to cook at chore time in the morning. And by noon it would be like cereal. It would just be puffed, that wheat would be puffed out. Oh, it was delicious. And we ate cream and sugar on it for a dessert. We did have other things to eat, but we ate a quick dinner. And then everybody threw the bathtub and everybody up and put on clean, good clothes to go to town in. And my mother would stand on the street and visit with people till I'd think I was going to die. I just got sick at my stomach. I'd stand there so long. And one poor lady had a boy, and he was just as miserable as I was. And I just got where I hated that boy because he had to stand there like I did. And we finally got old enough that Dad let us have a dime at a time. I mean, sometimes it was a dime, sometimes it was a quarter. And go down to the show. And I was with my brother, so I was fine. And then they had it was a cereal every week, and we would keep up with that. And then we were real happy when it was a cowboy show, but it wasn't always a cowboy show, but we always went to the show. And I think that made us like to go to town a little better. But as we would come home, Dad or Mom would go into Woolworth's or McClellan's and buy chocolate candy. It's like a chocolate candy to have to eat on the way home. And my mom got to having headaches on Sundays, just terrible headaches. And she finally figured out it was the chocolate candy. So
overdosing on chocolate on Saturday night.
So we bought some candy, but she didn't eat the chocolate candy. That we bought some else.
Did you ever go swimming anywhere?
Yeah, if you had a Shenandoah, on Thursday mornings you could come up, and the bathhouse was on the north end of the old swimming pool, and that was the deep water. You had to stay on the sidewalk to get around to the shallow part. But they would let us in for an hour if you had. One time it was Coke bottles we brought, and one time it was Indian nickels. And then you got in for a nickel. And just like that, it was different things like that. And she would go around and pick up the neighbor kids, and we just had that old car stuffed full. Mostly boys. I was just about the only girl in our neighborhood. And
Why did you wear swimming?
we had suits. Yeah, we all had suits. We went in the dressing room and put the suits on. We didn't wear them underneath our clothes because then we'd go back and we went back and changed and dressed.
Did you learn to swim there, or where did you learn to swim?
I learned to swim in the Shenandoah pool, but it was after I was married and had 2 boys, and I went up when they did, and embarrassed one of the teachers because Bill had another girl, and we said we were going to do everything they did, and when he put his fingers under the water and wanted us to count them, we did that and embarrassed him to death. He said, "You don't need to do that," and I said, "No, we're going to do everything you're supposed to." And what I wanted to do was to be able to dive off the diving boards, and I did. But the girl with me, she said the first time she went down, her whole life changed in front of her. And so she wouldn't dive anymore, but they let me.
You're quite the daring lady, I think. Do you have any memories of the CCC camp in Shenandoah?
Oh, yes. I remember that, I remember just lots about it, because boys from Farragut River were there.
Yeah.
And these two cousins of mine, I believe they both were in Shenandoah's. They had a large family, and these two boys were the oldest. And yeah, we were very interested in them, and the grocery store was built out of it. Brandonsburg Grocery Store was built out of those buildings when they tore that down. You didn't know that?
I did you?
I'm just sure that's right.
It sure could
Probably
be.
so. Probably so. All right. Anything else you'd like to tell us from the 30s?
Well, we had a beacon light a mile south of us, and it is like the beacons in the airports, and it went around, and there was the mail airplanes carried mail from Omaha to Kansas City, and we were on the way, and there were two of these beacons, and we just were lucky enough to get in, and it had lights, green lights on one side to an angle, and red lights on the other, because Kansas City was a little farther east than Omaha, so that's why they were offset. And when they showed on, they blinked, and when the beacon went around above, then there were two other smaller lights that went around underneath the beacon, and it was beautiful on the snow. That green light and the red light on the snow was beautiful. It was in a square lot. They put, to keep the cattle out, they put hog fence up and had it, but it was right on the road. Well, so was our house. We were on the other side of the road, but we were a mile north of it. And when the light would go around, it would come through my folks' and my brother's bedrooms, and then across the hall into my room if we had the doors open. And that was something that you always knew you were safe if you could see the light. After you saw a movie with a gorilla in it, you needed to know you were all right.
Well, we talked about the winter and the snow. What do you remember about the heat and the drought of the 30s? Do you remember anything in the summers of the...
Well, it was really some summers. We had a Packard that one summer that was so very hot, and it would get, no, I had that in my mind. It would stop, but if they had a seal, something, I can't remember. But anyway, Mom and I were going to Shenandoah, and we got up on the big hill north of Farragut, and that conked out, and she backed back down. But we were awful hot before we got to help. It was hot. But, you know, when you're working and everything, you don't notice. You have things on your mind, you just know to do it. I think I fell in the tank one time on purpose, because...
Watering the horses, huh?
Yeah.
Did you ever change, like, sleeping where you slept at night because of heat, or...?
Well, we had a little tent, and the neighbor boys and my brother fixed that all up, and the sheep were in the orchard. We had a really large orchard, and it had everything in them, peaches and cherries and mulberries and all kinds of summer apples and winter apples and grapes. So Dad had these sheep, and they kept it down just like a park. And so I had a girlfriend come up from Rockport and one from Shenandoah. And so we talked the boys out of it and let us sleep out there. So we took fresh bedding and cleaned that place up and went out and stayed. And the sheep would get up around midnight and around 3 o'clock and roam around that orchard and eat. And you could just hear them talking, you know, because there were probably 30 or 40 some sheep in there. And
Did you eat sheep, lamb,
well,
or...
yeah, after we were married, my husband and I had a sheep butchered, but my dad couldn't understand how we could eat it. In fact, he said, "I don't know how you can eat that lamb after you had a bottle baby out."
Oh.
Oh, a soft-hearted man,
'Cause he
wasn't
was.
he?
When he met, we usually sent out cattle on Sunday evenings, and it was a sad day. It was a sad time. He had to go get them and sort them. And he'd raised them from calves, and all of them, a lot of them had names. And
Right. He knew everyone, didn't he?
yes, he did. And it was very sad for all of us. Mom was the only brave one. When he went out, she was the only one without tears.
What about traveling salesmen?
Well, I have a real funny story to tell about that.
Oh, good.
That when the Raleigh man or some that came often, Mom would always say when she saw him coming up the walk, "Now listen to him. If I don't buy anything, he'll bang the door." And we'd watch that. If she bought something like vanilla or something, well, he'd go out quietly. But if she didn't have any money and couldn't buy anything, well, he would really bang that door, screen door. But we had a traveling salesman that sold stoves, and this girl that lived in Rockport and the girl from Shenandoah stayed at our house a lot through the summers. And they were there, and we came down for breakfast, and my brother was there. And he stayed in what we called the guest room downstairs, this man. And my mom would, my dad was there and everything. It wasn't anything dangerous. And this was a very nice man, and he was from Des Moines. And he had supper with us and was quiet, and everybody went to bed. And he got up the next morning, and of course the house was just buzzing with us kids. And Mom fixed pancakes and all the trimmings and all that, and had big breakfast and the table out big, and we were having so much fun. And he looked over at my dad and he said, "George, if you'd keep my horse and buggy and take me to town and I could catch the train and go home." He said, "I'm so homesick, I can't stand." He had a boy and girl about our age, and my dad said he would. So after we got the chores done, the train, you see, went from Red Oak to Hamburg and then back in the morning, and then it would come down again in the afternoon and go back. And so to go east, he had to wait till so late, towards noon. And my dad took him in, and he got his ticket and went. But he left that beautiful horse. It was like a Tennessee Walker. And it just would do anything we wanted it to do. So we were at the supper table, and my brother said, "You could get it." He got his license when he was 14. I had to wait till I was 16 when I got it. They changed the rule. And so my brother said, "Dad, could I take the car to town tonight?" And boy, we perked up, And we said, "Oh, can we go? And this Betty McCoy from Rockport, she said, "If you don't let us go, I'll sleep in your bed," because we were sleeping three in a room bed, and he was on a big bed by himself. And I shouldn't be telling this. And so he took off and went, and so we teased my dad into putting the saddle or the harness on that horse, and we just had so much. We just sang. We drove that horse in town, and we didn't really think about my brother being there, but he was pulled up at this restaurant, and he had a car full of kids his age, and he backed right out and took off.
Didn't want you around.
So other kids would take the horse and go to, because that was really a novelty to be able to drive a horse like that, and we'd go in and dance. And so along about 10 o'clock, Marvin's dad wanted to shut the restaurant up. We thought, well, maybe we ought to go home. So we went, the three of us went home, and my dad was waiting up to take the harness off and take him down and water him and give him some feed. And we girls, boy, we told Mom all about what a wonderful time we'd had. And we did this 3 nights in a row.
Whoa.
And the third night, we stayed longer, and a carload of boys came along and visited with us. So we got home probably 11 or 11:30, and my dad was so tired he'd gone to bed. So I was working with the harness and his bridle, and the girls was taking the harness off, and they unbuckled every strap, and we just had long straps, and we took them into this harness hook, and we just laid them over that. And we didn't think a thing about it, and took the horse down and got him watered, and put him in and gave him some feed and went to bed. And next morning while we were milking, why, 2 men drove in, and one was to take the horse back, and the other one was company man, and he went, saw that he got there. And so my dad went with him around to the horse barn to get his horse, and my dad looked up and saw that harness hanging up. He said, I better go back, there's so many kids in that barn, I better go back and see if them kids are all right. And so he left that man well, the man said, well, no wonder he didn't like his job if he had to put his harness together every day. My dad didn't say those girls had been taken to town. So my dad came back and helped him milk, and he got that harness put down. And I just cried. My dad would have bought that horse if there'd been any way we could have. Oh, it was such a beautiful horse. It was a kind of a tall horse, and it just did everything I asked it to do. It was a lovely horse. Never, of course, horses are always quiet, but it was just a beautiful horse. And the buggy was really nice. Oh, and I forgot to say, when this Betty told my brother that she'd get in his bed if he didn't take us to town, well, of course, we slept in my bed and never thought another thing about it. And we were in bed back with the horse and was in bed before he came home. And it started to rain that night, and a neighbor boy came by and took his shoes off out on the porch, and it didn't turn on a light or anything, went up and got in for his bed. We had the beacon going around. And went up and got in bed with my brother, and along about 5 o'clock, my brother leaped out of that bed. And of course the switch was over by the door. And when they come down to breakfast, my brother looked kind of sheepish, and this neighbor couldn't keep quiet. He had to tell us. He said, you never saw such a look on anybody's face.
Oh, what a good story.
So, did I understand right? So your mother drove the car?
My mother?
Did your mother drive
Oh,
too?
yes, definitely.
Okay.
Everywhere.
I think she was an independent-minded woman.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when it was rainy and real bad, there were a couple of single ladies that had never married that lived the place over, and my dad did a lot of their farming for them. And they had a 2-seated buggy with the fringe on top.
Oh.
And my dad would walk and drive a team over there and hook it up and bring those 2 girls and my mother if they were going south, and if they didn't, he would bring the empty buggy and pick up my mother. And then she'd pick up them and everybody on towards town and go to the club. And that was why they got back and forth in muddy roads. But my dad did a lot of nice things for us.
Did the club do quilts? Since Janine and I are putting together
Oh, yes.
a quilt show, is that what some of the women would do?
Oh, yes, we had quilts in the wintertime, and we kids liked it when our moms was having club. Well, it wasn't, they would just come to each other's houses and quilt. And they would bring dinner and stay out and make a day of it. And Mom would put white tea towels over all of that. And then when we kids would come in, everybody that's mother was there would come home with us, and we had a feast.
Oh,
And could they get a quilt done, and could they get all the quilting done in one day?
Oh, no,
Okay.
no.
Ooh.
It might be the only day that Mom would have them for that quilt. But no, probably not. She probably had them 2 or 3 times for each quilt. A lot of beautiful quilters.
yeah.
These 2 ladies that lived neighbors to us, that they lived with their parents. They did such beautiful work. Well, all of them did nice work.
And it was a social time too, though, right?
Yes, yes. And lots of times the men came. If it was after corn picking was done and before spring work, the men all came too. And if they had small children, they came too.
And then were those quilts actually used, or were they
Oh,
good
no.
quilts?
And you went to bed, you had all those quilts on. No, sometimes I think we used 4 or 5 quilts,
Yeah.
and it was heavy.
Yeah.
we used very few blankets. If Mom had a blanket, she'd have put it in the lining for the quilt.
True.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what did they use for the batting? It probably was a lot of old blankets or things like that.
My grandmother had carded wool and made her own blankets when she was a girl, and she brought them to Iowa with her. And Mom, she gave Mom, I don't know how many Grandma had, but Mom had 2, and she used those in quilts. I remember. They were cream-colored. They were
Natural, the natural
natural
color.
color. Mm-hmm.
Well, you've
Well.
had wonderful stories to tell. Thank you so much. Can you think of anything else?
Did I say about the autogyro, that,
No, I haven't heard about that.
what is a newspaper we get?
Sentinel?
World Herald.
Oh, the World Herald.
The World Herald owned autogyro in the early 30s. And when when the floods came down the 2 Nishneh rivers, it would flood the flat ground out from Riverton. And we could see the autogyro from our house and my cousin was there, and she come running and she said, "Dorothy, come quick, there's an airplane with a wheel on top going around." And it was this autogyro, and we could watch it quite a ways towards Farragut.
Oh, so it's like a helicopter.
Yes, it was a
I didn't
forerunner.
know what an autogyro was.
It was a forerunner.
Forerunner of a helicopter.
And the World Herald owned it, as far as I remember. I'm sure that's right. And it was orange, orangey red.
And okay. Then they were taking pictures then for the paper?
Yeah, that's what we assumed they were doing, because then they came out in the paper.
Wow. So what year would that have been approximately? You know?
Well, I would imagine maybe in 1933 or 34, maybe.
Okay.
We would, my dad had a sleigh, and we would go to this family that had the boy and the girl my age in the sleigh, and we would ride our sleds behind the sleigh, hook them on, and ride the sleds going down. But Dad would bring in rocks, and they'd put them in the oven to put in the bottom of the sleigh. And then while we were down there, then they'd put them back in Furnace's oven, and she'd keep them out till we got ready to go again. And then we would set up, my brother would sit between my folks, and I would sit on Mom's lap to come home and under blankets and things and sleep. No, I think that's...
You have many wonderful memories, and we thank you for sharing them.
Thank you.
This is August 26th, 2009, and I've been talking with Dorothy Allen. Dorothy Zimmerman Allen. Thank you.
Thank you.